In this video we're gonna delve into the life story of CPO Boss Hog, rest in peace, who definitely had one of the most unique and distinctive voices in the rap scene. CPO Boss Hog was also known as Lil Nation when he first stepped foot in the rap game as a member of the group Capital Punishment organization. And to most people, CPO is known for his classic featuring on the song Picture Me Rollin, which was released on Tupac's legendary album All Eyez On Me. And like I said, CPO had one of the most unique voices in the rap game, and therefore sometimes he was also referred to as the Barry White of rap. And CPO is one of my personal favorite rappers who was signed to Death Row because of his unique voice and also his rap style and lyrics. Besides that, he was also a real cool, positive and humble dude. And I want to give you his full and complete story, so I put a lot of efforts and research into this video because I think that CPO deserves much more recognition and appreciation, and I hope this video will also contribute to that. And unfortunately, CPO passed away on January 12, 2022, so this video is kind of a dedication to him, and I will tell his full life story in chronological order. And here's a quick overview of things that we will cover in this video. First, we will cover where he grew up, his connection with NWA and especially MC Ren. Then we will focus on the group CPO and their first album titled To Hell and Black. We'll also cover how he changed his name from Lil Nation to CPO and how it eventually became CPO Boss Hog. Then we will cover how he started working with Death Row Records. We will also cover why and when he started changing his voice and rap style and how it became the iconic voice and rap style that he was known for. We will also go in detail and give some more background information about some iconic tracks that he created. We will go in detail about the plans there were to form a duo group between RBX and CPO Boss Hog named the Heavyweights on Doggy Style Records. Unfortunately, the plans got cancelled, but there are some tracks out there that were recorded for the project. We'll go in detail about the plans CPO had for the I Boss album, which was supposed to be his last album, and unfortunately it was never officially released. We will do a breakdown of all the tracks and skits that CPO was featured on in chronological order. We will cover a list of CPO tracks that are supposedly still left in the Death Row vault, and we will cover much more, so there are definitely some new things that you will learn by watching this video. Now we got a lot to cover, so grab yourself a drink or roll some or do both and sit back, relax and enjoy the video. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you can appreciate these videos. And stay tuned for the next one that will be a documentary about Lil C-Style, who was a former member of the Dog Pound and who was also affiliated with Death Row Records. Now back to CPO Boss Hog, whose real name is Vince Edwards, and he was born on September 9 in 1963. He grew up in Compton and he's the brother of Andre Edwards, who's also known as Boki Loke, who's also a rapper from Compton, who was featured on records from other well-known West Coast rappers. CPO grew up in the same neighborhood as MC Ren, Eazy-e and Dr. Dre, and he knew them long before the rap group NWA itself existed. Actually, CPO went to the same school as MC Ren's brother Charles, and they spent a lot of time together when they were young. CPO said in an interview that when he was younger, he would teach martial arts, and MC Ren was one of his students. And he said that they did all kind of crazy things when they were training in his backyard. And for example, they would jump from a little roof with their eyes closed. And he said that they were not blindfolded or whatever, but they had to jump off a roof with their eyes closed. And it was not allowed to open their eyes until their feet touched the ground. So that kind of crazy things they did back in the days. So there were some good memories and they could laugh about it when they got older. So CPO and MC Ren knew each other since way back and long before they were even rapping and making music. And as they got older, MC Ren became a member of the group NWA and they blew up with their debut album titled Straight Outta Compton. And the success that NWA achieved and also other rappers from the area inspired CPO to also start rapping because he saw that his buddies were having success with it. So he wanted to see if he could also do something with it. And that was also kind of funny because he would be the one who used to tell Boki Loke, his brother, and also MC Ren when they started rapping before CPO did, they should get a real job because that rapping would take him nowhere. So when he saw that some people he knew were having success with it, CPO was also inspired to start rapping. And he also mentioned that he was specifically inspired by NWA's debut album, Straight Outta Compton, and his favorite track on the album was F the Police. And from then on he started trying to rap with a friend, and when he first started trying rap, it didn't really work out for him. He couldn't get the hang of it, but he was determined to keep going. And after a few weeks, he got to the point where he asked his brother Boki Loke for some advice because he had more experience and he already knew how to rap. So CPO was completely new to the game, and with the help of his brother, he managed to record a couple of demo tracks. And about 2 weeks later, when CPO was sitting at home watching some TV, all of a sudden MC Ren walked in, and CPO was kind of surprised because he thought that NWA was on tour, so he didn't expect MC Ren to drop by. Now MC Ren had heard from his brother Boki that CPO was busy with rapping and that he also recorded a demo. And one of those demo tracks was titled something like this, and it was written to DOC's track Funky Enough. So when MC Ren came to his house, he said he heard that CPO had started rapping and he asked him if he could hear the demo. Now CPO is very modest by nature, as will also become apparent later in this video. So his first reaction was no. But MC Ren kept asking him about it, so eventually CPO was like okay, whatever, and he played the demo for MC Ren. And the track that he played was something like this, that he had written to the beat of DOC's Funky Enough. And after hearing the first verse, MC Ren grabbed CPO by his collar and he told him, let's go straight to the studio. So they went to the studio at Young D's house in Carson, and Young D and CPO would later become a part of the rap group Capital Punishment Organization, and that is also where the letter CPO stands for. But I will cover that in more detail a little bit later in this video. So back to the story. Once MC Ren and CPO arrived in the studio, MC Ren put on a beat and he told CPO, who went by the name Lil Nation back then, I want you to rap the same lyrics from your demo track over this beat. And at first CPO was kind of hesitant because he thought it wouldn't work because the DOC beat had a slower tempo than the beat that MC Ren had put on. But eventually he tried it anyway, and it took a while to get it all right, but after a while it worked out, and then MC Ren was like, I want you to sign to my label. Now CPO didn't really know how to rap yet because he had only just started. But when MC Ren was like, I'm gonna pay you this and I'm gonna pay you that, so CPO didn't really need to take long to think about it, and he was like, okay, let's do it. So from that day, CPO had to write about 9 more tracks, and he was told to write 3 tracks each day. So from that moment, he was on a mission and really started getting serious about rap. And the first instrumental he got eventually became Ballad of a Menace, and that became the first track that CPO really put himself on the map with. And it was also the lead single from the album titled To Hell and Black, which was released in 1990 and distributed by Capitol Records. As CPO once explained in an interview how Ballad of a Menace came about, and he said, MC Ren told me I needed to write 9 more. Of course he was referring to the tracks he had to write. Then he said, he handed me a track from Isaac Hayes, which ended up being the Ballad of a Menace track. I wasn't sure I could write anything to it, but I smoked something right quick and sat down with a pen. The first thing out of my mouth was, this is a Ballad of a Menace. After it was released, the To Hell and Black album peaked at number 33 on the top R&B hip-hop albums Billboard charts, and the audio production of the album was handled by MC Ren with co-production by Young D. As mentioned earlier in the video, at that time CPO was the name of the group, and CPO stood for Capital Punishment Organization, and it was a group from Compton, California, founded in 1989, and it consisted of the following members, and this is according to what CPO once said in an interview. And the first member was Vince Edwards, aka Lil Nation, who changed his name later to CPO, and after that to CPO Boss Hog. More about that comes up a little bit later in this video, and the reason he called himself Lil Nation back then was because it meant he was big enough to be a nation. The next member was Clarence Lars, aka DJ Train, rest in peace, and he was known for his good scratching skills and was mostly known for his work with JJ Fett and MC Ren. DJ Train sadly passed away back in 1994 on July the 26th, and he was the victim of smoke inhalation from a house fire. And it's truly a sad story because supposedly everybody who was in the house already left and were outside. But DJ Train thought that one of his siblings was still inside the house, and it could have been the case that he was disoriented because that's a side effect of inhaling smoke. So unfortunately DJ Train went back inside the house to save his sibling that was already outside while family members tried to stop him, and by doing so he eventually lost his life. So that's truly a tragic story. The next member of CPO as a group was Darren Sepp, aka Young D. He was the executive producer, And on the day that MC Ren took CPO Boss Hog to the studio for the first time after hearing his demo, they went to the studio over at Young D's house that was located in Carson. Another member of CPO as a group was Granville Moten, aka the Chip. He also went by the name Chip the Convicted Felon or Felonist G Moten, and Chip the MC. He was a rapper and a high school acquaintance of MC Ren's, who was also invited to contribute to the first debut album of CPO as a group. Cation Curry, who was also known as Cation the Lyrical Menace, was also a part of the group, and the Chip and Cation the Lyrical Menace also called themselves the Foe, and I'm not 100% sure if MC Ren was also a part of the Foe, but according to CPO Boss Hog, the Foe was the other part of CPO as a group. And on the image that is displayed right now you can see MC Ren, Lil Nation aka CPO Boss Hog, and the Foe, which are the Chip and Cation the Lyrical Menace. And they called themselves the Foe, as I have just mentioned. Now there were also two other guys who were affiliated with the CPO group, and those guys are Big Truck and Big Chop. They were in a two-man group with the name The Punish Patrol. And in this image that is displayed right now, you can also see that Big Truck and Big Chop are mentioned in the photo with the other CPO members. Now besides this, I really couldn't find much information about the Foe or the Punish Patrol, so if you have any additional info, make sure to drop a comment below. And the last person who was also affiliated with the group CPO is of course MC Ren, and I have mentioned his name a couple of times already, so I think that should be clear. So in 1990, the debut album To Hell and Black was released by CPO as a group, and the album also includes the track Something Like This, and that was the first track that CPO Boss Hog recorded in the studio over at Young D's house with the lyrics from the demo track that MC Ren heard from CPO that was written to the beat of DOC's Funky Enough, and MC Ren told CPO to take those lyrics and rap them over the beat that was used for the track Something Like This, as it ended up on the To Hell and Black debut album. So it's actually really cool that the first track that CPO Boss Hog recorded in the studio after he was only rapping for 2 weeks ended up on the debut album. And as I also mentioned earlier in this video, Ballad of a Menace was one of the first instrumentals that CPO Boss Hog received from MC Ren, and it eventually became the lead single from the album. A music video was also released in which MC Ren introduces Lil Nation as CPO in the beginning of the video. And that was kind of confusing because at the time Lil Nation was the name of Vince Edwards, who was later known as CPO Boss Hog, and at that time CPO was the name of the group that he was a part of. But in the music video it appears as if Lil Nation is being addressed as CPO. And all the NWA members who were really popping at that time were also featured in the video of Ballad of a Menace. And CPO once said in an interview, quote, "To be associated with them and have them in my first video was just, are you kidding me? I got NWA in my first video? It was huge. It really didn't dawn on me until later that they were at worldwide acclaim when they were." End quote. It was also kind of confusing that on the album cover of To Hell and Black, only the face of Lil Nation is displayed with the CPO logo. And the reason for this was that the idea was to put the spotlight on Lil Nation on the first album, and the intention was to focus more on the other members of the group on CPO's next albums. But ultimately, no other albums were released after the group's first album. So after they released the first and only CPO as a group album, it was reasonably well received and peaked at number 33 on the top R&B hip hop albums Billboard charts. And one thing that CPO once pointed out in an interview is that there were plans to use the lead single, Ballad of a Menace, for the classic gangster movie Menace to Society. CPO said that one day he received a phone call from the Hughes brothers and they asked CPO if they could use the track Ballad of a Menace as the theme song for the movie. CPO liked the idea, so he was like, hell yeah, of course. And then the Hughes brothers said, can you talk to MC Ren for us? Because they also wanted MC Ren to play a role in the movie. Eventually one thing led to another, and then CPO heard that MC Ren didn't get the role in the movie, and Jerry Heller also was like, CPO, you don't want to do that no more. And of course he meant not using the song Ballad of a Menace as lead single for the movie. But CPO was like, yes I do. But in the end it didn't happen, and Ballad of a Menace was unfortunately not used as the theme song for the movie. Another thing I want to point out, and if you like gaming then you may already have noticed it, but the Ballad of a Menace track also appeared years later in the Grand Theft 5 in-video game radio station West Coast Classics. The game was released in 2013 and it broke industry sales records and became the fastest selling entertainment product in history. earning 800 million in its first day and 1 billion in its first 3 days. So it was cool that the Ballad of a Menace track was used for that game. So about a year after CPO's debut album as a group was released, CPO Boss Hog, who went by his name Lil Nation at the time, he could also be heard on NWA's second album titled End for Life, and he can be heard on the track Find 'em, F 'em and Flee. He doesn't spit any verses on the track, but he says some funny things at the beginning, during and at the end of the track. And at the end of the track, he also calls himself Mr. Big Draws, which was kind of funny. And in an interview, CPO explained how it all went down and how he ended up on NWA's second album. And he said, quote, "I was sitting at the audio achievements one day and there's nobody in the room but me and Dr. Dre, and I'm sitting there watching him, and he turns around to me and tells me to go in the booth and say something. I'm like, go in there and say something for the album? I'm like, hell yeah. So I run in there and Eazy comes in there telling me to say this and say that, and they had me being Mr. Big Draws on there. So I went in there and did that ish. When the album came out, me and some of my boys were sitting in front of the Palladium one night, and I had my CPO jacket on, and a car full of chicks rails by, and they were like, Mr. Big Draws, end quote. And of course CPO was laughing out loud when he told that story. Now after the release of the first album To Hell and Black, eazy-e told CPO, "You should let me and Dr. Dre do your next album." And CPO thought it was a good idea, but he was loyal to MC Ren because he had opened the doors for him in the rap game, so that's why he said to Eazy that it should be discussed with MC Ren. Ultimately, things fell apart with Capitol Records and CPO left the label, and one of the main reasons was that Capitol Records didn't really know how to push gangster rap, and they were more interested into MC Hammer type of rap music according to CPO. He also said that the breakup never caused tensions or arguments between him and MC Ren, and MC Ren and CPO appeared on several songs later on in the future together. But he never asked or spoke with MC Ren about how he felt about it business-wise. And CPO said the following about leaving Capitol Records, quote, "I left Capitol Records because they didn't have my best interest at heart, so I self-terminated my deal with them," end quote. After the group disbanded, Lil Nation changed his name to CPO in the singular form. The reason he changed his name to CPO was because he was often addressed as CPO, which was not surprising since he often said CPO in his lyrics. Only his face was used on the album cover with the CPO logo, and he was addressed as CPO in the video for Ballad of a Menace. So the name CPO kind of stuck to him, and a lot of people were addressing him by that name, so that's why he decided to call himself CPO from then on. And after leaving Capitol Records, CPO was signed to Ghetto Life Records, and that was the record label where the rapper Chocolate was also signed. And Chocolate was the guy who was the link between Suge Knight and Vanilla Ice and the whole incident between them. And what happened was, at the very early stages, even before the Chronic was put out, the rapper Chocolate was linked to Vanilla Ice, and his music career goes way back, and his first major commercial success was ghostwriting Ice Ice Baby for Vanilla Ice. And supposedly Chocolate was never paid as he should for that song, and supposedly also some other songs that he ghostwrote for Vanilla Ice. And that's why Suge Knight extorted payment to Chocolate, because at that time Suge Knight was the manager of Chocolate and was considering making Chocolate an inmate of Death Row Records. And they were also considering signing the Convicts, the duo that consisted of the rappers Lord Trey Deuce and Big Mike, and they were also considering signing Chocolate. And by the way, Chocolate is not the same person as Chocolate Bandit, who was the rapper from Dallas, Texas, who was also signed to Death Row, who was dissed by the realist on the song It's Easy to Be a Soldier When There Ain't No War on the Chronic 2000. That was released in 1999, but that's a topic for another video. So the rapper Chocolate is not the same person as Chocolate Bandit, and that's how it came about that Chocolate recorded some tracks on Death Row Records, and this happened often, and potential inmates would make songs before they were signed in preparation for when they were signed. And as I mentioned, all of this was at the very early stages of Death Row Records, even before Dr. Dre's The Chronic was released yet, and that's how it came about that CPO Boss Hog was also featured on 2 tracks from Chocolate that he recorded on Death Row Records. And one of those tracks is titled Is Like That, and that was recorded in 1992, featuring Chocolate, Trey Deuce and Big Mike of the Convicts, Snoop Doggy Dogg and CPO. And this track is straight fire, and everybody on this track is killing it. Snoop had that old school The Chronic doggy style type of flow, and he also mentions Death Row in his lyrics. CPO can be heard on the last verse, and he also does a great job and he killed it. And if you pay attention, you can definitely hear CPO's typical voice on some part of the lyrics, but in those days his rap style and his voice was a little bit different, as it would later be when he got signed to Death Row Records in 1994. But we will get more into detail about that a little bit later in this video. The other track by Chocolate that also featured CPO is titled 5 to 10, and both tracks were recorded in 1992 but were not released until 1993, and they were not released by Death Row Records but by Ghetto Live Records, to which Chocolate and CPO were signed at the time, and they were released on Chocolate's album titled Life in a Day. And in an interview, CPO once mentioned that during this time he was already asked to join Death Row Records, and remember, this was before the Chronic was put out, but at that time he didn't accept the offer because he didn't think it was straight to MC Ren, because Dr. Dre had not left Ruthless Records on good terms. CPO indicated in an interview that he regretted his choice because there was a good chance that he would otherwise have been on the classic album The Chronic, and CPO said the following about this, quote, "When things started going sour at Capitol, there was a record that was going to be done called It's Like That with Chocolate, Trey Deuce and Big Mike of the Convicts, me and Snoop. I went up to what was called then Death Row Records, and it was me, Dre, Snoop and a gang of others. Everybody started pitching the idea to me about coming over to Death Row, and my thing was I was so loyal to Ren that I didn't think it would be a cool thing to do to just undercut my boy who put me on, and then I go over there with Dre. Even though you could see that Death Row was going to be the ish, you could see that. So Dre sits me down and tells me it's like leaving one job for another. This is before the Chronic, so basically if I had left then, I likely would have been on the Chronic. Needless to say, I did not go, the Chronic came out, blew the F up, and I was just pissed off at myself." End quote. Some time passed and CPO was then with Ghetto Live Records, and after Death Row blew up with the Chronic, CPO was convinced that that was the team that he wanted to be a part of. So CPO left Ghetto Live Records and then he approached Dr. Dre to join Death Row Records. And CPO once said in an interview, quote, "Once I saw what Death Row was doing, my manager, Michelle Williams, and I decided we want to be out of our current situation, which was Ghetto Live Records." End quote. Eazy-e from Ruthless Records was also interested in working with CPO. And coincidentally, CPO was invited on the same day by Dr. Dre and also by Eazy-e to talk about working together. CPO had the first appointment that day with Dr. Dre and he went to the studio to meet him. During this meeting, Dr. Dre played the beat of Gin and Juice that ended up being on Doggy Style, which was Snoop's first album. And this was before Doggy Style was put out, so almost nobody had heard this beat yet. And when CPO heard that beat, he was immediately blown away by it. Later that same day, he went to the meeting with Eazy-e, and Eazy also played a dope beat for him, which was eventually the beat for the track Real Compton City G's, or Real MFG's, on which Eazy-e dissed Dr. Dre as a reply to Dre Day. In the end, it was decisive for CPO to choose Death Row Records because they had Dr. Dre as a producer, and he liked the Gin and Juice beat better than the Real Compton City G's beat. Another reason that was taken into account was that it didn't feel right for CPO to sign with Eazy-e, while MC Ren was also with Ruthless, because then it felt like he was betraying his homie. And Dr. Dre is now at Death Row Records, which is a different company, so that felt better too. Death Row was blowing up at the time with Dr. Dre, Snoop, RBX, Rage and the Dog Pound, and that also attracted CPO. CPO's goal was to get on 2 or 3 multiple platinum albums through Death Row and then move on, and he actually had no intention of releasing a solo project through Death Row Records. And CPO once mentioned this about that situation, quote, "I chose Death Row Records because ultimately they had Dr. Dre tracks and a particularly potent cast of new artists, but I never planned to remain there, only to do 2 or 3 songs on what I felt would be multi-platinum projects, after which I left." End quote. When CPO started working with Death Row Records, he wanted to leave the name CPO alone and he started calling himself Boss Hog. But many people would still call him CPO because that name kind of stuck to him. For example, Snoop Dogg would address him as CPO and Corrupt would call him Boss Hog. He also said that by that time there were also other people started calling themselves Boss Hog, so therefore he put CPO in front of Boss Hog and he started calling himself CPO Boss Hog from that point on, to distinguish himself from everybody else. It can also be heard that CPO started using his voice slightly differently from the moment he started working with Death Row Records in 1994. CPO said that when he first started out rapping, it was more of a battle rap style and he used his voice a bit louder, and that his loud voice sounds different from his normal speaking voice. because rap started to change and other rappers like Snoop Dogg had a style that was a bit more laid back, and it was actually Snoop Dogg that suggested to CPO to try that laid back style. And from then on he went with this new type of laid back smooth rap style, which gave him that unique and distinctive Barry White type of voice that really stood out. So in '94 CPO started working with Death Row Records, and his first appearance was on the Above the Rim movie soundtrack with the track titled Just So You Know, and the track is straight fire. The beat was produced by Tony T. Green and co-produced by Carl Butch Small. And CPO's friend and producer Sandman had also a part in creating the beat, and that led up to some issues between CPO, Sandman and Tony T. Green. And what happened was, according to Tony T. Green, who explained the situation in an interview, he said one day he was called into the Death Row office because Suge wanted to talk to him about something. So he went to the office, and when he got out of the elevator, producer and CPO's homie Sandman said to him, "Yeah, you gonna see what it's like stealing beats, motherf." And T. Green said that he had absolutely no clue what that was all about. And then he said he saw CPO sitting there looking strange at him. And when he got into the office, he said he saw two thugs in there and Suge wasn't even there. One of the guys had a pistol and the other one let him know he had a pistol as well. And one of those guys said to him, "Suge is gonna call in a few minutes and I hope we don't have no problems, man." So those two guys let T. Green know it was serious and they were not playing with him. So T. Green of course was stressing and thinking to himself, what's this all about? And then the phone rang because Suge called to the office. And Suge was sitting in a plane somewhere high in the sky, and he said to the guy who answered the phone, "Put T. Green on the phone for me." And when he got on the phone, Suge asked him, "T. Green, how the F you got CPO's Death Row contract? What you doing with CPO's Death Row contract? That's his business." Then T. Green answered and he said, "I don't have CPO's Death Row contract. The contract that I got was sent to me by the movie people for the Above the Rim movie. I don't have his Death Row contract, I have the Above the Rim contract." And Suge was like, "They said you have his Death Row contract." And T. Green explained, "No, I don't have that. I only have the Above the Rim contract that was sent to me." So then Suge asked for CPO to get on the phone and asked him what it was. And according to T. Green, CPO was like, "Oh yeah, this is my Above the Rim contract. I thought it was my Death Row contract." Then Suge asked to put T. Green back on the phone again, and he asked him, "And what's up with you stealing the beat for CPO's track for the Above the Rim soundtrack?" And T. Green replied, "Nah, Suge, it's like this. CPO had a song and I stripped it all the way down to the drums, and then I put 24 other things on the track, so I didn't steal the song, I just made the song off of the drums." Then Suge was like kind of confused, and he asked to put Sandman on the phone, and he asked Sandman, "So T. Green stole your song?" And Sandman then said, "Oh no, he just stole the drum beat to my song." And then Suge asked to put T. Green back on the phone, and he said to him, "Alright T. Green, you can go, man." So T. Green left, and he was glad that it didn't escalate that day. And this is a story as it was told by T. Green, and there are always two sides to a story. But as far as I know, CPO has never spoken extensively about this in an interview. But one time somebody asked CPO who produced the beat for Just So You Know, which was the track that was on the Above the Rim movie soundtrack. And CPO said it was a long story, but that T. Green was the producer of that beat. So that's how that went down. The next project, released by Death Row Records, that CPO Boss Hog was featured on, was the Murder Was the Case movie soundtrack. And for that project, he recorded a track titled The Eulogy, featuring Corrupt and Corrupt's protege, Slip Capone. This is also a very dope track, and the beat was produced by CPO's homie Sandman. And what happened was that one day in the studio, Corrupt asked CPO if he could do a track with Slip Capone, and CPO had already heard some stuff from Slip Capone, and he thought he was tight, so he was like, "Yeah, bring him in." And Sandman was the producer of the beat, and he was the one that asked Corrupt to do the hook on that song. So that's how that went down. And during his time at Death Row Records, CPO also recorded a couple of other tracks. Some of them were eventually released years later, and others were never officially released. And one of those tracks that goes hard was released as a bonus track on the Chronic Relit and From the Vault, and that track is Full Name Mick. And this track must have been recorded around the Murder Was the Case movie soundtrack era, and it was produced by Sean Barney Rubble Thomas. And one thing that you may have noticed already is that on the Doggy Style album cover is that the full title of the track Murder Was the Case is Murder Was the Case, Death After Visualizing Eternity. And if you take the first letters of the words between the brackets, you get Dave. And Snoop recorded a track produced by Dr. Dre with the title Poor Young Dave. And this track was also released as a bonus track on the Chronic Relit and From the Vault in 2009. And in this track, Poor Young Dave, Snoop raps about a kid named Dave who never obeyed and who did all the wrong things to make money. And in the end, it didn't end well for Dave because he was killed by one of his homies who turned out to be a snitch named Mick. And in the track Fool Named Mick, CPO tells the same story but then from Mick's perspective. This track is really tight, the beat is cool, and CPO really does a great job in telling the story about Mick and Dave. And this track is actually one of my personal favorites by CPO, and it's also loved by many CPO fans. And it's funny that CPO himself didn't like the track at all. In fact, he said that he hated the track, and he also mentioned that the version that was released on the Chronic Relit is an unfinished version of the track. And in a post on social media, CPO said this about the track: that music was produced by Sean Barney Robert Thomas, but the song you're hearing is an unfinished version. The finished version is much better, but was never released. And the version you're hearing was never supposed to be heard. I actually hate that version. LOL. Another Death Row track by CPO is an unreleased track with the title Let It Flow, featuring CPO Boss Hogg and Lord G, and you can find it on YouTube. This track was recorded in '94 and it was produced by T Green. And Lord G was a rapper who was also featured on the Above the Rim movie soundtrack with the song Me Money Right. If you don't know the track Let It Flow, you should definitely check it out. It's a cool grimy beat and CPO killed it as usual. Another track that CPO appeared on Death Row Records was After 3, and the rapper on that track is Lil Bow Wow, who was very young at the time. You can also hear Corrupt from the Dog Pound and Jewel. Rest in peace. CPO can only be heard at the end during the outro, and he doesn't spit any verses, but he's just talking over the beat, giving some shoutouts. The beat is dope. Overall, it's a solid track that was recorded in the 90s, but it was released in 2012 by Wide Awake on the 20 to Life Rare and Dangerous Volume 1 album. Another solid track featuring CPO with his brother Boki Loke was also recorded in the 90s, but released years later, also on the 20 to Life Rare and Dangerous Volume 1 album, and the title of the track is Fleetwood Mac. And I believe the beat is produced by Sean Barney Robert Thomas, and this is a very laid back and smooth track, and CPO and Boki both complement each other well, and this track reminds me a bit of the track Duology by CPO and Slip Capone, which is also straight fire. Another track that CPO recorded on Death Row Records is titled Dank, Drank and Draws. It was recorded in '94 and the beat was produced by Sean Barney Robert Thomas. It's a CPO solo track, beat is tight, and CPO laid down some solid verses on it. The song was never officially released and it was laying in the infamous Death Row vault for over 20 years. Eventually it was leaked online, and CPO once mentioned in an interview that he was told that this song, along with Fleetwood Mac and several other tracks, was supposed to have been destroyed when he left the label. He honestly didn't like the song when he first recorded it back in '94 because he said he was still trying to find his style back then, and he considers this not one of his best tracks. It's funny that several tracks that CPO has recorded are considered solid songs by the fans, but CPO himself was actually not completely satisfied with them and didn't want them to be released. And the last track CPO Boss Hog recorded on Death Row Records is one that we all know, and that is Picture Me Rollin, featuring Tupac, Big Syke and Danny Boy. Supposedly there are also some other tracks that CPO recorded on Death Row Records. Those are still unleaked and unreleased, and I will cover those later in the video. But now, back to Picture Me Rollin. For many people, this is the signature song that they know CPO from. The last track, as I already mentioned, that CPO recorded at Death Row Records for Tupac's legendary album, All Eyez On Me. It was the 7th track on the 2nd disc, and the beat was produced by Johnny J. And this track is an absolute classic. It's a perfect track to listen to when you're cruising around in your car. And I'm 100% sure that for many people around the world, this was one of the tracks that they played when they first got their driver's license and they were cruising around in their car. And to me, and I also know to many other people, CPO really has a legendary featuring on this track. Just listen to the record again and pay attention when CPO comes in and the beat drops in his first part, starting with the line, and I will say it slowly: I gots to get the F up in it, what? Formulate a caper, cause I'm straight suffering from lack of having paper. And the way CPO says it with his voice and the beat drops is just a classic opening line. And when CPO finishes his first part, then Pac comes in and the beat changes again. Tupac also does a great job, of course, as usual. And after Tupac is finished, then CPO comes in and the beat drops again. And the second part is also straight fire with the classic line also. Move smooth as a motherfucker, me and my nine. I'm cool as a motherfucker, I'ma get mine. Now we satisfied, got the pockets on swollen, Boss Hog in this pack. Pictures rolling. Man, everything about this track is great. And the story how this track came about is also great. And it went down like this. After CPO Boss Hog recorded several tracks on Death Row, unfortunately things came to a dead end and he was no longer booked in the Death Row studio anymore. So he was still signed to the label, but was basically doing nothing for them anymore. So he thought about leaving the label because he basically got shelved. So one day he was sitting at home, pissed off and feeling worthless, and then he decided to call the Death Row studio just to see who's there and to see if he could do something. So CPO called to the studio, and after somebody picked up the phone, CPO said, "Hey, who's in today?" And coincidentally, Tupac was there, so the other person that answered the phone said, "Pac is here." CPO was surprised because he thought that Tupac was still in jail, and he said, "Who, Tupac? But Tupac is in jail." So the other person then replied, "Nah, Shook went and got him out, and he's been here all weekend, but nobody knows." Then CPO asked the guy to put Pac on the phone, and a few seconds later Pac was on the phone, and CPO said, "Hey, what's up, Pac?" And Tupac replied, "What's up, who's this?" So CPO said his name, Tupac was like, "What's up, CPO?" Then CPO said, "I had a vision." And Tupac was like, "What was it?" And CPO said, "Do a song with Tupac." So Tupac said, "Alright, I'll do one with you if you do one with me." So CPO said, "Cool, we gotta do that." Thinking to himself, maybe in the future they would make it happen. But Pac was like, "I'm in here now, you coming?" So CPO was kind of happily surprised, and of course he said he would be there. And one thing to keep in mind is that when CPO spoke to Tupac on the phone, they barely knew each other. They only had seen each other 2 times before that, and that was very briefly. Basically they only greeted each other and said what's up, and that was it. So they kinda knew each other and there was mutual respect, but they weren't really close friends or anything like that. So CPO went straight to the studio after he spoke with Pac on the phone, and when he got there, Tupac was there with Syke, Danny Boy, and Michelet was also there. So they let CPO hear a couple of beats, and they picked the beat that was the beat for Picture Me Rollin. So they went to work, and CPO remembered he was walking around smoking and writing his lyrics. And one thing he noticed was that Pac smoked cigarette after cigarette after cigarette when he was in his focused working mode. In an interview, CPO said he had never seen somebody smoke so many cigarettes in such a short time ever in his life. And he also said that Tupac was a very cool dude to be around with. Tupac and Big Syke were done pretty quickly with writing the verses, and CPO didn't just want to do a record with Pac, but he actually wanted to do his verse together with him. So he called Tupac and he said to him, "I will do this part, then you come in and say whatever you want to say, and then I come in after you." And Pac was like, "Okay, cool." And he wrote his lyrics, and that's how the classic track came about, and how it ended up that CPO went first, Pac came after him, and then CPO comes in again. After they were done, CPO actually didn't think Pac would use the song for his album, and he thought Tupac was just being polite to invite him to the studio to record and kick it with him that day. Actually, CPO didn't think his verse was that good at all, and he thought that it didn't really fit the song. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, CPO is really a humble dude, and he's very modest and often surprised that people respond so positively to his work. So he thought the song wouldn't be on the album, which it did. And it ended up being the track that most people recognize him from, because All Eyez On Me would become one of the best selling rap albums of all time. And the day he went to the studio to meet Pac, he didn't even think about getting paid for it or whatever. So he just went to the studio, he did his job, and that was it. So he didn't get paid for the track. So years later, when CPO was kind of broke, as he said in an interview, and he was literally suffering from lack of having paper. That's kind of ironic because he also said that on his lyrics on Picture Me Rollin. So years later he decided to call to the label to see if he could be compensated for his part on the song. And CPO thought to himself that it would be great if he could get like 5,000 to 7,000 for it or something in that range. So after checking, he got compensated and he received a check, and it was a check for $37,000 for the song with Tupac. And he received it at a point that he really needed the money, so that one phone call that he made to the studio that day that he spoke with Pac, and they ended up doing the record that eventually led up to a nice paycheck years later and also one of the highlights of his career. So what a story is that? And with all this info in the back of my mind, I can dig the whole track even more when I listen to it now. So CPO recorded several tracks while he was signed to Death Row Records, but he says he never intended to release his own album there. And despite the fact that Death Row was known as a violent environment, CPO himself never experienced anything crazy. According to him, it was strictly business and he was just working in the studio, and after he was done recording, he would leave immediately. The only thing that kind of bothered him was how the money was paid over at Death Row. In an interview he explained how that went down, and he said, quote, "They had this way of working over there where they would, to control you, not pay you. You would go and wait for hours for your check, and the guy would keep telling you that they'd be there with check in a minute. The whole day would go by and your check would never show up. That got old real fast. So I went and got a real job and stopped rapping." End quote. So after Death Row, CPO Boss Hog got a real job, but he continued to make rap appearances. And later in this video, I will do a full timeline of all tracks and skits CPO appeared on. But first I want to cover 2 albums that CPO had in mind to release, but unfortunately that never happened. And the first album was supposed to drop in the year 2000, together with RBX, who is also a close friend of CPO. They would form a duo group and they would call themselves the Heavyweights, and they were supposed to be released under Snoop Dogg's label Doggy Style Records. After leaving Masterpiece No Limit Records, Snoop wanted to build a label of his own and he created Doghouse Records. The name Doggy Style Records was still owned by Suge Knight at the time, and he had to wait a couple of years before that name became available again, so therefore he started Doghouse Records and eventually he turned that into Doggy Style Records when it was available again. And RBX and CPO were supposed to sign to Snoop's label and form the group The Heavyweights, but unfortunately it never came to a deal according to CPO, and he said this about it, quote, "As for the Heavyweights, that was an experimental project when RBX and myself were interested in signing with Doggy Style Records, but we only did a couple of songs and ultimately we didn't do a deal." End quote. So CPO and RBX did a couple of songs together for this project, and 2 of them you can find online. One of those songs is titled Gangsta Nostra, which was released on the album The Shining by RBX in 2005. It's straight fire. And for the beat, a sample was used from the track from the Godfather movie. CPO's verse on this song is one of my favorites by him, so if you don't know the track, you should really check it out. And the second song that you can find online by the duo is titled Taking Flight. It was never officially released, but it was leaked online by Polar Bear, who also produced the beat. And according to him, it was recorded in 2000, and it also corresponds to when Snoop started the label Doggy Style Records, then under the name Doghouse Records, after leaving No Limit Records, and when the idea was born to form the group The Heavyweights with RBX and CPO. CPO also said that he and RBX recorded several songs for this project, and he said, quote, "I don't have either of the songs with RBX, but he does. He used one of them on his last albums." End quote. And in this comment he is referring to Gangsta Nostra that appeared on The Shining in 2005, as I already mentioned. And if you listen to the lyrics of both tracks, you can also hear them say The Heavyweights, of course referring to the name of the duo they were supposed to form. CPO also started his own record label by the name Titled Brim Entertainment Group, and he started this before he went sick, and he announced he was working on new material for his album release titled I Boss, but it got delayed because of health issues. In an interview, CPO said, quote, "The only reason I haven't released another album over the years is because of severe health issues." End quote. In another interview, CPO went into this a little bit more deeply and he said, quote, "My lungs stopped functioning and that has pretty much halted everything." End quote. In 2010, CPO unfortunately also suffered from health issues with his heart. The rumor was that he had a heart attack, but that wasn't really the case, and he explained it in an interview and he said, quote, "It wasn't a heart attack. It was partially congestive heart failure, but the doctors didn't know what happened. There was a host of things going. My body was what they called weeping. A whole lot of carbon dioxide had built up in my brain and they didn't know what that was about. But mostly it was congestive heart failure. A lot of people tend to mix up congestive heart failure with a heart attack, but they're not the same thing. It was going to kill me just the same though. I didn't realize it, but the doctor told me I was literally on my deathbed." End quote. The health issues delayed the whole process that it took to work on the I Boss album, and CPO said the following about that, quote, "When I was in the hospital, they had a lot of tubes down my throat and nose. So when I came out of that, my voice had changed and I wasn't used to using it. It took me a minute to get my voice again on the mic, but we just finished up the album," end quote. He also said that this would be his last album, but unfortunately it was never officially released. But 6 solid tracks from the iBoss album are released online, which are Your Body Is Hot, that was released on August 19 in 2014, and other tracks that would appear on the iBoss album are Just Game, Bye Boo, Super Gangster featuring Slip Capone, and CPO said that it was pure coincidence because CPO had come up with this title and he didn't know that Slip Capone also had a track and an album with the same title, Super Gangster. Another track that was supposed to be on iBoss is Day Boogie featuring The Chill, and the last track, the 6th track, is Bank It. And Bank It was also released on the Compton Gutter Volume 1 mixtape that was released in 2015, and it originally was supposed to be a song that CPO wrote for his buddy E.A. Ski. CPO would also do ghostwriting for other people, and when he did that, he would write the song and also lay it for the people he wrote for to let them know the flow of the lyrics to the beat. But this song fitted CPO so well that when people heard it, they said to him that he should keep it for himself. And he explained this in an interview and he said, quote, "It was really for E.A. Ski because I wrote the song for him. When I write songs for people, I lay it for them first to let them know how the flow goes. When everybody heard the song, they said I should keep the song for myself, but I don't work like that. I wrote it for Ski, so that's whose song it is. My boys were so adamant about it, so I asked Ski and he said it was cool and he gave it to me." End quote. After releasing his last album, CPO planned to stop his music career and focus on other things, including publishing 2 books, and he was also very interested in doing voiceovers. And he stated the following, quote, "My interest in music has taken a backseat to my literary works in sci-fi, fantasy, and in horror and the macabre, because that's what I had been building up to do long before the music game. Truth is, I've never really been a rapper. I'm actually a writer who just happened to get a record deal. LOL." End quote. On social media, on his X page, CPO had posted a photo to show the impact of his health issues. The image shows what he looked like before he went to the hospital, and on the right side you can also see how he looked like afterward. And it's clear to see that it had a heavy impact and he had lost quite a lot of weight. The time afterwards he remained very positive and indicated that his health was going reasonably well again. Unfortunately, CPO was not given the time to implement the plans because he passed away on January 13, 2022, and he was only 52 years old. It's a damn shame that he can't actually bless the world with another album. His voice was incredible and most definitely very distinct in sound. And I'm sure he's truly missed by rap fans and especially West Coast rap fans all over the world. Now let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy that CPO has left behind and take a look at the timeline of all tracks and skits CPO Boss Hog appeared on after the To Hell and Black album. Some more background information was given earlier in the video for a couple of tracks, so I will quickly cover those, and for tracks that I haven't covered yet, I will provide a little more background information. So after the To Hell and Black album, the first appearance CPO made was on the NWA album N for Life in 1991 on the track titled Find 'em, F 'em and Flee. In 1992 he recorded 2 tracks featuring Chocolate, and I already covered those earlier in the video, and the track titles are 5 to 10 featuring Chocolate, and the second track is It's Like That featuring Chocolate, Lord Traduce and Big Mike of the Convicts and Snoop Doggy Dogg. Both tracks were recorded in 92, but they were released in 93 on Chocolate's album Life in a Day. Track number 4 on the list where CPO made a featuring on is titled True Hoes featuring HWA. This group was also known as Hoes with Attitude, and the track appeared on their album As Much As You Want. It was released in 1994, and this group was formed by eazy-e. The next track was recorded and released in 94, and it's Just So You Know. It was the first track that CPO did for Death Row Records. After that, the 6th track is The Eulogy featuring Corrupt and Slip Capone, released on the Murder Was the Case movie soundtrack in 94. Another Death Row track is Full Name Mick, released on the Chronic Relit and From the Vault in 2009, but it was recorded when CPO was down with Death Row in the 90s. Let It Flow featuring Lord G is the 8th track, also recorded in 94, and this is an unreleased track, but it was leaked online so you can find it on YouTube. The 9th track is Slippin' in the West featuring Corrupt. It was released on the Chronic Relit and From the Vault in 2009, but this was also recorded in the 90s when CPO was signed to Death Row Records. The 10th track is After 3 featuring Lil Bow Wow, Corrupt and Jewel. This was released on the 20 to Life Rare and Dangerous Volume 1 album in 2012, but it was recorded also when CPO was signed to Death Row Records in the 90s. Number 11 is Fleetwood Mac featuring Boki Loke. It was also released on the 20 to Life Rare and Dangerous Volume 1 album in 2012, but recorded when CPO was with Death Row Records in the 90s. 12th track is Dank, Drank and Draws. It's an unreleased track that was recorded in 94 when CPO was also down with Death Row Records. And the last Death Row track is Picture Me Rollin featuring Tupac, Big Syke and Danny Boy. As I mentioned already, it was released on the All Eyez On Me album in 96. Next track, number 14, is Death Represents My Hood featuring Boki Loke. This was released on the Tales from the Hood soundtrack in 1995. This is actually a track from CPO's brother Boki Loke. CPO only says some stuff on the intro and he doesn't spit any verses, and the beat was produced by Sean Barney Robert Thomas. Track number 15 is Prodigy of a N featuring Deuce Deuce. It was released on Deuce Deuce album On a Sip of the Deuce in 1995, and also on this track CPO doesn't spit any verses, but he says some stuff on the outro. Number 16 is Life or Death Hotline. It's a skit featuring Roger Troutman and a couple of other dudes, and CPO also has a short appearance on it. He doesn't spit anything, he only says a couple of things. Number 17 is Make Your Spot Hot featuring E.A. Ski, and this was released on E.A. Ski's album Earthquake and also on The Black in 1998. This is a solid track and CPO did a great job on it. Number 18 is Bag of Chips, also featuring E.A. Ski. This is an unreleased track for E.A. Ski's album Earthquake, and this is also a solid track. Number 19 is Somebody's Watching Me featuring TQ, you know, the guy from the song West Side. Also Yuckmouth and Big Lurch are featured on the track. It was released on Mike Mosley's album Platinum Plagues in 1999. This is a smooth song, it's a dope track, and CPO also does a solid job on it. Number 20 is The Big Bang Theory featuring Trady and Goldie Loke, who are also known as the Eastsiders. Snoop Dogg, Corrupt, Exhibit and Pinky are also on the track. This was released on Snoop Dogg Presents the Eastsiders album in 2000, and CPO once mentioned in an interview that Trady and Goldie Loke are two of his favorite rappers from the West Coast, and it was huge for CPO to work with them. CPO ended up on this record because he was sitting in the studio and he was watching Snoop and the Eastsiders who were working on the Eastsiders album, and then Snoop asked CPO if he wanted to jump on his album, and CPO was like staying cool and he replied, "Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely." But on the inside he said he was like, "What? Did he just ask me?" And he thought it was cool because he wanted to work with Snoop. And CPO also mentioned that working with Trey D was very cool. He was hyping him up and motivating CPO. And after they were done, CPO thought about it and he didn't like his part at all. And a day or so later, when he thought about it, he actually asked them if they could remove his verse from the track. But they said it was already too late, because the day before CPO asked it, they were playing the track in the studio, and everybody who was in the studio and heard the track, they all knew CPO's lyrics because it was so dope. And I agree, I also think it's a great record, and especially CPO's part is banging. So they kept CPO's part on the record. And years later, in another interview, CPO also said that this was one of his favorite tracks from his catalog, because of the whole experience and how the track came about. Track number 21 is They Lovin' Me Now, featuring Warren G and Butch Cassidy. It was released on Warren G's album Return of the Regulator in 2001. Another track featuring Warren G from the same album is titled It Ain't Nothing Wrong With You, featuring Warren G, Mr. Grimm, Vic Damone and Latoya Williams. Number 23 is This Is My Life, featuring Kendrick. This was released on the Bones movie soundtrack in 2001, and Bones was the horror movie starring Snoop Dogg. The next track, number 24, is titled That's My Homeboy, featuring Daddy V and Suicide, I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly, and it was released on Daddy V's album The Compton OG in 2003. The next track, number 25, is titled Pimp Shh, featuring MC8. It was released on Run Off Records on the Various Artists album Hard White in 2003, and Run Off Records was founded by DeAndre Big Dre Smith. His name may sound familiar because his name is associated with the murder of Tupac in Las Vegas, and according to several sources, including Keefe D, Big Dre was said to have been in the white Cadillac from which the fatal shots were fired at Tupac. There are different stories about who the actual shooter was, with some sources claiming that Big Dre fired the shots instead of Orlando Anderson, who was attacked the same evening by Tupac and Death Row associates. Track number 26 is titled The Format, featuring MC Ren and eazy-e. It was released on eazy-e's album Past and Present in 2003. Number 27 is titled World War IV or WW4, featuring the 4 Live family. It was released on the 4 Live family's mixtape Bases Loaded in 2003, and this track is a 4 Live Records website exclusive. Track number 28 is titled Face and Blast, featuring the South Central Cartel and Sandman, and it was released on South Central Cartel's album Random Violence in 2004. And this is a solid track, and especially CPO is dropping some bombs on this one. Number 29 is California, featuring the Children of Sin. It was released on their album, I don't know how to pronounce this exactly, but it's titled Annihilation, if I'm not mistaken, in 2004. This is also a good track. Track number 30 is titled Robbery, featuring MC8. It was released on MC8's album Compton's OG in 2006. I really like the beat on this one. CPO also makes an appearance on it. It's a banging track. I like it, so if you don't know it yet, make sure to check it out. And you can find it on YouTube if you search for it. Track number 31 is titled Don't Make Me. It was released on the Compton Gutter Volume 4 in 2008. It's a nice track, but I don't listen to it very often. Track number 32 is titled Compton and Long Beach, featuring Daddy V, The Chill, Lil Have That, Trip Loke and J-Bo. It was released on the OG Daddy V Presents Compton and Long Beach Together in 2009. It's a dope track, nothing really special, but it's okay. Track number 33 is Gangsta Funk, featuring eazy-e, E40 and Be Legit. It was released on eazy-e's album Resume or The Resume. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but it was released in 2010. And it's a dope track with dope artists. Number 34 is titled Prayer F, featuring Big Y, Prime and Boki. It was released on Tupac's Assassination soundtrack in 2007. Track number 35 is titled 11th Hour, featuring MC Ren and eazy-e. It was released on a mixtape titled Summer Music Watch in 2012. And this was a free download compilation by Hoopla Media Group and DJ Fate. I couldn't find the track on YouTube, but if you Google for it, you can find it over there and you can download it. Now I almost forgot the next 2 tracks. There was supposed to be a little bit higher on the list after the Big Bang Theory on the Eastsiders album that was released in 2000. But the 2 tracks are Gangsta Nostra featuring RBX. It was released on The Shining in 2005 and it was recorded for the Heavyweights album in 2000, as I already covered. And also the next track, that is Taking Flight, also featuring RBX. This one is unreleased and was also recorded for the Heavyweights album in 2000. And we're gonna finish this list with the 6 tracks that CPO recorded for the iBoss album that was never officially released. And those tracks are Your Body Is Hot, Just Game, Bye Boo, Super Gangsta featuring Slip Capone, They Boogie featuring The Chill, and the last one is Bank It. So there you have it, the complete list of all tracks and skits that CPO was featured on. They are in chronological order, except for the 2 tracks featuring RBX, because they were supposed to come after the Big Bang Theory featuring the Eastsiders that was released in 2000, as I have just mentioned, but I almost forgot those, so therefore I added them later in the list. Now if I might have missed one track or a skit featuring CPO and it's not on the list, then definitely make sure to let me know in the comments. And it would also be cool if you could let me know which tracks from CPO you like the most. As CPO was once asked in an interview what his personal top 5 tracks are from his catalog, and he mentioned, quote, Picture Me Rollin off the top, but also with that would be The Big Bang Theory with the Eastsiders, doing It Ain't Nothing Wrong With You with Warren G for the Return of the Regulator album was cool. I love doing stuff with Warren. The Uology, because I got a chance to do a song with Corrupt, and I really wanted to do something with the Dog Pound, as well as Slip Capone, Super Bomb. And the last one I'd have to say is Find 'Em, F 'Em and Flee with NWA on the N for Life album, just being associated with that album. End quote. And it's a shame that we can't expect any more new music from CPO, but there's still a chance that we might get to hear some music from him that we haven't heard before. Because there's a list online with a couple of CPO tracks that are unreleased and unleaked that he recorded when he was signed to Death Row Records. And the tracks on that list are Temple of the Hog, and the instrumental of this has been leaked, unfortunately without the CPO vocals, and you can find the beat online, it's on YouTube. Also on the list is an alternate version of The Uology featuring Slip Capone. Another title that was on the list is That's What's G's For. Also on the list was a track titled Gangsta. And another one was Pimp's Plan. You also have a track titled Dark Funk Stroll. Next track was Go to the Drawers. And you also have a track titled Jam and Priest. And there are also 2 untitled tracks on the list. So who knows, we might get to hear those tracks someday in the future. And what I think is really cool about CPO is that even though he was into gangster rap, he was also a very humble and positive dude who spread a lot of positive messages through his social media like X and Instagram. And as you can see here, his Instagram is full of positive messages, and an example of a text that he posted is, "To whomever reads this, if by chance anyone, including yourself or any circumstance, may have caused you to believe that you are incapable of overcoming whatever burden to acquire success in your endeavors, you mustn't submit to that belief, because nothing could be further from the truth. Within each of us exists ability to achieve heights that any person throughout history has achieved, and perhaps even surpass those heights. All you need to do is believe in yourself and muster the courage to set forth and see it done. Even through failed attempts, it is only a matter of determination and the will to continue, because all a failed attempt does is serve to remind you of what didn't work for you. And all you need to do is adjust your focus and keep making attempts until you discover what does work. It may sound a bit strange now, but when you've reached your goal, you'll appreciate it for what it was worth. Truly." And with those powerful and positive words, we have also arrived at the end of this video. If you have any additional information or cool stories about CPO, make sure to share it in the comments to keep his legacy alive. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned some new things about CPO that you didn't know before. And drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I would appreciate that very much. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the next biography I'm working on is going to be about Lil C-Style, who was a former member of the Dog Pound and LBC crew. I also want to do a detailed biography about him, so it might take a few weeks to get it done, but I will also try to upload some new shorter videos about different topics in the meantime. And if you have any suggestions or requests for bios about Death Row Records related artists, make sure to let me know. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stay tuned for the next videos because we're gonna drop bombs.